This, according to Mr. Emefiele, the central bank had no choice but to pursue an expansionary monetary policy using development finance policy tools targeted at raising output and aggregate supply to moderate the rate of inflation. Joining me now on the show is the Director of Development Finance at the Central Bank of Nigeria, Yila Yusuf. A good evening to you, Director. It's good to have you here on the program.
Thank you, Boston, for having me on the show today.
We appreciate your time. How much is the total figure or the headline figure that the Central Bank Development Finance has invested so far or has put on the table so far this year?
Okay, if you remember, the central bank released a stimulus package worth 3.5 trillion. As we speak today, we've provided funding in excess of 670 billion across various sectors.
Okay, so you now we say across various sectors. What sectors?
Okay, agriculture, manufacturing, and services. Agriculture has taken 40% of that ballpark figure I gave you. Manufacturing another 33%, and then services 27%. For agriculture, really across Anchor Borrowers program, which is the major food program of the federal government, we've disbursed in excess of 180 billion for the wet season. We're planning for the dry season. As you are aware, there were floods in some part of the Northwest, so it's very important that we do a major dry season. It's going to be the largest that's been done so far in the country. In construction, there's so many projects going on in the free trade zones, and same thing in services. Really trying to keep jobs and just, like you said earlier on, promote production and hence supply.
So when the central bank says development tools or policies are being used so far, what type of tools are we talking about here?
Really, both conventional and unconventional. I mean, all over the world, such tools are being used. So what we did as a central bank was to release broad policies. So things like we reduced the interest rates on all our interventions from 9% to 5%. We granted regulatory forbearance on certain loans. We also released targeted funding to various sectors. So it's a mix of both broad and those that are targeted. Unconventional things like the 100 billion healthcare. I mean, COVID is health related. You really need to be able to provide funding to address that. We also looked at a facility to help those who have lost their jobs and to also keep small businesses running. So we started with the 50 billion targeted credit facility that has moved to 100 billion. Governor Emefiele has increased that to 100 billion. And as we speak, we've disbursed in excess of 73 billion. We also provided funding 1 trillion for manufacturing. Quite a lot of jobs are there, textile and other related industries, just really focused on those sectors that will really try to keep jobs and also encourage production.
Why are these policy tools important at this time?
Yeah, thank you, Boston. They're very important because you really need to keep the economy going. One of the functions of the central bank is really around price stability. Trying to encourage domestic production, ensuring that there's a lot of output. So funding has to be provided in a time like this where the pandemic is ravaging. People are having to stay at home. Supply chains have been disrupted. I talked about the healthcare one. A lot of people have to go to hospital, falling ill and all that. We really need to provide funding for our hospitals to either increase bed space or also begin to look at how we can look at research and development, especially around drugs. A lot of countries have gone into protectionist mode. If you look at agriculture, traditional countries that typically do export, the Thailand, the Vietnam, really are keeping all their production in their silos. So you've seen increased funding in the wet season to things like rice. Annual consumption for Nigeria, things like maize, 50 million metric tons. Presently, we produce about between 11 and 12. We really need to see how we can, bridge that gap. Same thing for rice. Trying to bridge that gap. We're going into a dry season. There's been a bit of flood in the Northwest. But one of the things that the central bank working with the ecosystem has done is to look at how do we improve yield. So traditionally for maize, we really were doing around 2 to 3 metric tons per hectare. We're looking at how we can improve that. So we've planted high yield seeds this year. working with that ecosystem to look at how we can increase that to 5 metric tons to be able to cover that gap. So those are some of the tools that, and the funding, the sectoral targeted funding that we've been embarking on. Healthcare is very, very important. 100 billion has been provided. 50% of the applications have already been funded.
We'll speak more
both,
about
pharmaceutical.
Mr. Yusuf, we'll speak a bit more about healthcare. I want us to stick with agriculture a little bit and why it's very important that these development finance tools and actions taken in the agri sector is tied to inflation, food inflation in particular. Who is getting this money? Are they repaying? Are
Absolutely.
we seeing results?
I mean, yes, we are. I mean, food is a national security issue. We really need to be able to ensure that we're self-sufficient with food, and that's why we took a decision to be able to, improve production in the wet season, ensure that there's provision of funding to all the players, both prime anchors and the associations who are smallholder farmers. And like I said earlier on, we're going to be embarking on a huge dry season farming to augment part of the flooding that's happened in the Northwest and to also bridge the gap in the staple foods that we consume, things like rice, things like maize. We're also doing a bit of cassava this year, really to take care of the pharmaceutical industry. There are a couple of raw materials. Like I said earlier, things are not coming in. So if you look at the commercial agri-credit scheme, which is one of the funding tools that we use as a central bank, you talk about people repaying. Total disbursement so far in excess of about 600 billion, over 420 billion has been repaid. So indeed, there's success and there's repayment with some of the programs that we have.
Okay, Yusuf, we'll continue this conversation after the break. We'll touch on solar power, gas. We'll also talk about healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and hospitals after the break. You're watching Arise Exchange. We'll be right back. Let's get back to Nigeria, where from all indications, the Nigerian Central Bank has dug in for the long haul as far as its sectoral interventions are concerned, as the list continues to expand almost on a daily basis. Unpacking this multi-billion Naira programs for us tonight is the CBN Director of Development Finance, Yila Yusuf. Well, this is the second and the final part of his conversation with us tonight on the show from our Abuja studios. Thank you, Mr. Yusuf. Let's continue on this conversation around the sector of solar or energy in general, whether it's gas or solar. What's in it here for the central bank?
Yes, working with the fiscal authorities, if you recall, the fiscal authorities released a stimulus also of 2.3 trillion. And one of the fastest way to bridge the energy deficit is to really deploy solar. Solar prices have crashed almost 93% per kilowatt hour over the last 10 years. It's a way to quickly bridge that deficit. It's a way to also create jobs. The role of the central bank really is around looking at how we can domesticate production of such items. Once we do that, solar panels, batteries, cables, and other accessories, we conserve foreign exchange. So working with the fiscal authorities, with the Ministry of Power, the Rural Electrification Agency, we are looking at how we can fund the lighting up of over 5 million homes. So we just released a guideline for both downstream players and upstream players. So upstream players, those who produce batteries, those who produce solar panels. There's an agency of government, NASENI, who's proven that indeed a lot of all the panels and a lot of all the other accessory items can be done in country. So for the central bank, Governor Emefiele has said, look, one of the things he wants to promote is backward integration. Once we can do that, we can conserve foreign exchange. So we're providing funding to see how we can light up 5 million homes as part of the economic sustainability plan of the federal government.
So let's talk about healthcare, hospitals, and pharmaceutical. How far are we doing in this area? You were touching about this in the earlier comments in the first opening part of the program.
Doing very well. Like I said earlier, 100 billion, we set aside funding for the healthcare industry. As we speak, we've processed over 55% of the applications. We've disbursed, as at today, we've disbursed 44.7 billion to over 50 projects. Pharmaceuticals about 34%, but hospital services majorly. So things like cancer centers, hospitals, either bringing in new MRI machines or adding additional hospital space due to the COVID and other diseases that they treat on a daily basis. We've even funded the funeral home in Lagos. So pharmaceuticals are adding additional lines. They're looking at how they can increase production of drugs. And very importantly, the central bank has been doing a lot of M&E monitoring to ensure that the banks are disbursing these funds and that these funds that are provided are used for the purposes that they have been given. Also very important, because of the pandemic, we're looking at how we can, spur R&D. So we've received applications. I was on your show some weeks ago. I intimated your audience that we've have a body of evidence, a body of experts that are really going to look at these applications. As we speak today, we've received applications asking for about 90 billion. That part, so the first part is a loan. The grant part and the research part is a grant. So the body of experts, they're looking at it. 90% or 92% of the applications we received are from the universities, which is a very good thing. We're looking at how we can fund them. So we'll be providing companies a maximum of 500 million naira to see how they can produce either herbal drugs or reverse engineer some of the drugs that we do import from Asia, and then individuals can get grants of up to 50 million. So there's a significant uptake of activity around the healthcare sector, and a lot of the manufacturers on the pharma side have gotten these disbursements, and we're really tracking and seeing what they're doing with the funds.
Yila Yusuf, are you feeling overwhelmed?
Not really. I mean, that's the role of the central bank. Section 31 is around development finance. We're working with the fiscal authorities on a daily basis to look at how we can, bring back growth, stimulate, like you said earlier, on demand, and ensure that there's output, especially around the agri sector, which I'm very passionate about. Yes, there's been, like I said earlier, on some flood, but I don't think there should be any panic. We're also looking at how we can, a lot of the middlemen and speculators are really going to get burnt, because working with the anchors and other players, we're looking at a bumper harvest, especially around things like maize, things like rice. Nigerians are going to see increased yield, because with the program that has been run this year, well, we've used high yield seeds, so guaranteed output. I talked about M&E. On a daily basis, we look at how the farms are doing. Healthcare is something we're also significantly tracking to ensure, like I said earlier, the funds are dispersed. So I'm not overwhelmed. It's national service. Governor Emefiele is committed to it. I've also talked about backward integration, looking at how we can conserve foreign exchange. And once you put all this, it ties all together. Apart from growth, real sector activity, small businesses who contribute 84% of the jobs that we have, trying to ensure that those jobs are kept, and also
Mr.
that
Yusuf,
our people are working, and hence we spur back growth.
Mr. Yusuf, thank you so much for today.